Awesome. Welcome back to the Hornthrowers podcast, an impromptu Halloween special, and I couldn't kind of think of a better guest than the Satan-worshipping, witchcraft-loving Greenlung to have on.
Hey,
thanks for having us.
No, honestly, our pleasure. Yeah, we got an advanced listen of the new album, This Heathen Land, which comes out on November 3rd. I absolutely adored it. It was great. Yeah, and we just thought we'd diving in with what you had opening question.
My opening question was, so you guys, we saw that you were recently in Norway and you were in the basement in the with the black metal thing. What was that like?
Oh yeah, we finally made it to Oslo last weekend after a couple of years of post-pandemic trouble, and yeah, it's amazing. It's funny going to the Helvete, which is obviously Euronymous from Mayhem's sort of record shop, which is the basement is still there. I think I don't know who owns the record shop currently. It was kind of like a decent metal record shop, but then you go in the basement and there's all this amazing stuff, like just like a massive Sodom poster from like the late 80s, and like these amazing lineups of black metal bands. My favorite was a poster which had a load of bands with like names like Impaler, in indecipherable logos, and then one band that was just called Buttocks, which probably was, I don't know if Norwegian people in the 90s thought that Buttocks was a cool concept for a band name, but yeah. Sadly, I don't think Buttocks made much of a dent on metal history, but big shout out to Buttocks. Haven't heard a note, but great name.
Yeah, they're not on Spotify, unfortunately.
There will be someone out there that's watching this going, "Oh, posers!" I know.
Posers.
I've
got all of their tapes, including their demos from way back when, and no, that's really cool. That's kind of like a pilgrimage I've always wanted to make, going to Helvete and kind of seeing the graffiti and stuff in the weird black circle basement.
There's a massive coffin in that room as well, and just generally I'd say bad plumbing and electricity, which is pretty scary. No, I think that's one of the nice things about being a touring metal band. As a kid, you want to go to all these places and sort of do the pilgrimages, but probably you're not minted and you're not going to fly around Europe to obscure places. But that is one of the really nice things, when we've got a minute to just run out into whatever town you're in and tick off something from the bucket list. I mean, usually it's like a sort of an ossuary from a Benedictine monks full of skulls or something. There's only so many metal ones that still exist, I guess. But yeah, it's also, I just love, actually in the UK we're really spoiled, I think, for heavy metal record shops like Crypt of the Wizard in London and Black City Records in Bristol and Dark Earth in Liverpool. There's some really good ones. It's nice to see a sort of proper extreme metal only record shop as well.
That's pretty cool. I wasn't aware of the Liverpool one actually, and we're not that far away from it. So
check that out.
Yeah. No, for certain. Yeah, so like as I mentioned before, we got like a sort of like pre-listen to This Heathen Land, which is out November 3rd. It was really good. I think it's the best thing that you guys have done. And I noticed like one thing that I really appreciated is somebody, at least as a teenager, that used to kind of like dive into like occult things. It seems very well researched. Like everything from like, I think it was like the Song of the Stones, like where you're talking about sort of like Wiccan rituals and stuff like that. I kind of got involved with that stuff as a teenager and didn't quite go as far as joining a coven, but got an invitation and stuff like that. I was wondering if that's something that you guys have got any connection to, or like if it's just purely reading and whatnot.
Lots of it comes from reading. I mean, yeah, we do have definite connections. Like there's a bar in London called Helgi's, where we've shot the video to Maxine Witch Queen, and Steph, who runs the bar, has a shop next door called the Moon Temple, and she's a practicing witch, and she actually hooked us up with Maxine Sanders and her coven, and some of them came and appeared in the video. So there's definitely, it's not like always from a distance. But yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about this band, is that it's a sort of receptacle for a lot of storytelling stuff I like to do. You know, like when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was like always writing shit novels, horror novels, and lots of. It's funny how some of that stuff that an idea you had 10 years ago for a book or something comes back and ends up as a short little snippet of a Green Lung song.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think actually people don't go far enough a lot of the time. So much about metal is storytelling and fantasy, but I get really frustrated by just the tropes of metal and sort of not going the distance. I even with classic metal, I was always like, oh, cool, this is a song about witchcraft or whatever. But often it would be done in a really sort of light hammer horror-y kind of way in the
Yeah.
80s. And I love lots of those bands, but with Green Lung, I kind of like going to the sort of ludicrous extra level of like, with Maxine, which is a pretty short poppy song. I read the entirety of Maxine Sanders' autobiography and watched like 300 documentaries and like wanted to get a sense of the biography in there in a really light way. But if you're, an Alexandrian witch, you can listen to that song and be like, oh yeah, those guys treated this subject with love and reverence. And if you're going to write about someone who's a real person as well, I think you owe it to them to like, do it properly. I don't want Maxine Sanders, who has heard that song, to hear that song. What a load of bullshit.
Well, absolutely. Like the coven that I got like the tentative invitation to was like they were like an Alexandrian coven that I think I can't remember the actual author of they wrote the Witch's Bible, but they were like people because it's like a big thing in like your lineage and who you kind of come from. Because I think didn't Maxine come directly from Gardner or something like that?
Yeah. Well, and that whole thing's super complicated because obviously the Alexandrians and the Gardnerians all have like different. And it was kind of funny. We had a mix of people at the video shoot, and I was deferring to them for the sort of expertise on these rituals, and like they were arguing amongst themselves on whether you point the sword up or down and stuff.
Yeah,
it got a bit sort of Spinal Tap at points, which I always funny.
No, but yeah, like lyrically speaking, like the amount that you do delve into sort of the history of it as well, like references to everything from like sort of the Pendle Witches and but it kind of goes beyond witchcraft because you guys like borrow a lot from folk, like kind of the English folk tradition as well, especially on like Song of the Stones and things like that. It's really cool to kind of actually see a band that's delving into like that kind of like English mythology. You've even got like references like the Wild Hunt and things like that, like kind of later in it. Is that like a conscious thing that you guys are trying to kind of draw from that culture?
Yeah, I think on this record I wanted to go sort of beyond folk horror and into folklore more generally. I think as a storyteller and as a songwriter, it offers you a lot more range. Like horror is just one kind of emotional landscape, and I think when you introduce, I think Hunters in the Sky is kind of our version of a sort of protest song against aristocratic landlords trying to take away common land on Dartmoor, but you do it, all of these deep references to the landscape, both the natural landscape and the sort of folkloric landscape. There's this protective spirit of of Dartmoor, who lives at Crocken Tor apparently, called Old Crocken, and he, is rumored to inhabit the Wild Hunt in some way, and then that tied into the whole. I'd always wanted to do a song about the Wild Hunt because it's one of the most sort of prevalent folkloric motifs in European culture. You find it in Germany, in Scandinavia, and in England, and whoever's leading the Wild Hunt is different. And it's Odin, over in Norway, it's Woden or Old Crocken or others here. Sometimes it's Herne the Hunter.
Yeah, exactly, or Canunos, or
and I think that's one of the great things about folklore as a sort of theme for a metal band. Often there are plenty of bands that tap into folklore, but often it is in a kind of Spinal Tappy kind of non-committal way. It's sort of just a bit of window dressing, and I think actually on this album we really wanted to sort of really go as deep as possible into the folklore and really research it. Yeah. and it's sort of adding to it as well. It's an active tradition. You know, you're
Yeah.
taking part in an oral storytelling tradition that goes back thousands of years, which is really fun. It's like you become part of it, and I think that's one of my favorite things about Green Lung is it started off as us sort of telling stories or writing songs about things that were happening over there. And on this album, I really feel like we've gone through the gone through the screen in a way, like with Max, you know, getting to know Maxine Sanders' Coven and stuff. That
Yeah.
felt really, yeah, we'd gone across the Rubicon, and that's really satisfying.
That level of like sort of lyrical depth was probably one of the standout features of the album, and kind of like I really appreciated that. Yeah.
I feel like as well, the video for Maxine Witch Queen and the One for Sorrow video are so different.
Mm.
Like, and with the storytelling, I like how One for Sorrow and like going back to like Graveyard Sun, it's the same guy, isn't it?
Yes, Julian Firth, that's right.
Yeah, but I like how they're kind of like Hammer horror sort of ish, and they're very like fun as well.
Yeah, I think it's always important that it's fun, and like humor is a really underrated element of metal. I think, you know, lots of my favorite metal bands like Typo Negative, wearing the hoodie, like or you know, like there's a large dollop of dark humor there, and humor kind of lets you get away with going to places that sometimes are quite camp or like you risk being cheesy. But I think if you do it with the right sort of approach, you can get away with a lot there. And that's often where metal, for me, goes wrong. And I'm really excited. We've got one more video coming, which is going to land in a week or so, and I'm really excited for people to see that because it's again a very. I like that you picked up on the sort of tonal differences there because I think they are very different videos, and I think the third one is kind of as different, or if even more different than the other two. So that would be really interesting to see how that goes down.
That's pretty cool. I like how the thing you said about the horror and comedy thing is like a bit of a tangent, but I watched the new Evil Dead film last night and it was more serious, but like I don't know if you guys have seen it, but like they've just got all the references, like they say like the things like Dead by Dawn and like Swallow Your Soul and stuff like that. But the film is so much scarier than the other ones, but it's still funny. But then I found that more effective with it being so funny that the scariness.
I mean, I'm in the minority of people where I absolutely adore Army of Darkness.
Oh
just
yeah, no, I
because of how
like
goofy it
those
is.
films. Like I really, really like Evil Dead, but I think it's interesting with the horror comedy thing.
No, for sure. It's like,
well, I think both horror and comedy take you to really uncomfortable places a lot of the time, and they both take you away from what is normal. And I think they prod at similar parts of your brain in a weird way. A lot of stuff that is scary could also be funny with the slightest nudge. And, I think you've got to be very careful when you're trying to do horror to land it in the right place. And I think being comfortable with comedy is actually like, or humor at least, is really important.
And I think having an idea of how ridiculous what you're doing is, doing it knowingly is quite important. I think Evil Dead Rise that you just mentioned was a really good example of that because it's easily the most grotesque film in the series, but it's done in a sort of very knowing way. You know, that end scene in the car park, you couldn't really do that if it was done extremely po-faced, you know. And in the same way, doing things with a dash of humor gives you, I think, a bit of permission to take things into an even more crazy place.
Yeah, that's what I think is cool about One for Sorrow with like when you guys just like pop up. I think one of you pops up from behind a tree and then goes away, and then it goes into the weird bit with like the guy like getting attacked by the crow thing and that. Yeah,
that's actually Tom Dalgetty who pops up and lowers himself. That's our record producer. It was like he had like a Hitchcock style appearance in the video. And actually our other producer is Wayne Adams, and he's in there in Maxine. So it's kind of satisfying to have these people who don't usually get in front of the camera, the kind of people who are usually hidden in a room with us somewhere, to get them to sort of surface.
Were they willing to be in it, or did you have to force them?
Well, Tom literally forced himself in. He loves it. Wayne, I think, was seduced by the promise of free beer and a night in a bar.
Yeah. So we wanted to say as well, like, I saw you for the first time in Newcastle, but you'd already seen them in
Damnation.
And you were going about how great you were live, and I was like,
I was like, it sounds exactly like the album. Honestly, it's incredible. You're gonna love it. And
I'm like, oh, don't hype it up for me, because like when people hype things up, I always like to go with like not low expectations, but like medium, you know.
Yeah.
But then I was like really blown away. Like the guitar sound, especially like when the solos kicked in, was like one of the biggest guitar sounds I've heard. I don't know if it was of how close I was to the speaker, or is it like this?
It's expressive. the guitars, like the lead guitar, is very expressive in a way that like I don't feel like a lot of metal solos tend to be as well. Which I know, obviously, Doom, you're taking a lot more of like blues influence and stuff like that, but there is actually a lot more feeling there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as a guitar player, I've always been much more attracted to the musical side of things than the mechanical side of things. As a teenager, I was a bit of a shred head, you know. I'd be learning all the John Petrucci solos and sweep picking and all that kind of stuff. And while that does, you know, sometimes make an appearance in my playing, as I got older, I became much more interested in being musical rather than being mechanically adept. I think that's one thing that alienates me from a lot of modern metal in a lot of ways. Is it seemed like metal musicians focused much more on their mechanical skills, their technical abilities, rather than making things musical. And as I've gotten older and my music taste has become more diverse, the things that impress me now won't be something that's hard to play. It'll be a really subversive use of a chord progression or something like that. And it's I think that's massively informed my lead playing, because I always audiate first. So I'll imagine in my mind's ear, so to speak, what's going to happen musically, and then work that out on the guitar rather than just noodling around scales or chord sheets and trying to find solos that way. And yeah, in some ways, playing, I always used to hear like, you know, baby boomers say, oh, you know, it's one thing to play fast, but it's much harder to play slow. And people would reference BB King and those kind of players like that. And it wasn't until I was quite a lot older that I understood what they meant, because even from a technical perspective, playing expressively, you know, being able to really communicate with your instrument is in itself, you know, a technical achievement. It's not just about being able to shred and play fast. If you've got control over your vibrato, over your bends, able to make the instrument really express, that's something that's really important as well, I think.
Yeah, and yeah, that communicates massively through on the album and the previous ones as well, because I think like a lot of times I get the feeling that the goal is to impress rather than what's actually going to serve the song with a lot of bands.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think like just songwriting has been our obsession kind of since, at least since Woodland Rights, like just really like trying to cut down. You know, it's so easy with sort of stoner or like doomy stuff, psych rock, to just write really baggy stuff and try and get by on vibes alone. And certainly when I was a teenager, like that, like every band I was in was guilty of that. Basically because you can't play. But one of the really fun things of working with Scott is that, like, you know, he's incredibly technically adept, but actually just writes like the melodic side of it is so great for it to be a singer, because you just, everything's sort of there for you to play with, and it's sort of perfectly formed, and it's almost obvious what I do vocally, because Scott writes, it's so intuitive, like the way he puts together songs, and almost never has a demo been sent that sort of it's hard to conceive of a vocal line for.
Well, it's also like a lot of, specifically in metal, like, you know, like big kind of like choruses that are actually going to stick with you, and not something that tends to be like massively prevalent in metal. But like with the past 3 albums you've had, there are so many memorable hooks and choruses in it that I don't know if like a lot of metal bands eschew that because they're kind of like worried about it being too poppy or what, but I think it is something that is severely lacking in a lot of songwriting in metal that you guys do actually bring to the table.
Well, it's just weird because like a lot of the biggest metal bands ever, you know, like Priest, Maiden, all the bands we grew up fucking loving, are bands that had real skill for that. Like Iron Maiden is that they are masters of a hooded chorus. There's always a verse chorus bridge. You know, they might be quite foggy in the structure, but like, you know, people are like, oh, Bruce writes these poppy little songs like 2 Minutes to Midnight on everything. It's like, yeah, but almost every song Steve writes has got like a towering chorus. And yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I think you get pigeonholed as a retro metal band if you lean into the melodic side of things and really focus on the songcraft over, you know, extremity or originality of sound. I mean, I don't really believe that metal bands sound genuinely original. It's like really hilarious to me when like something like Sleep Token comes out and everyone's like, wow, so original, where to me it just sounds like sort of like Deftones meets Sam Smith. You know, it's like like, which isn't a bad thing, obviously. Like, it's got its place, but it sometimes irks me when people are like, oh yeah, you know, it's like retro metal. It's like, well, it's songwriting. It's like trying to get to like, you know, yes, there are some 70s sounds in there, like the Hammond organ and stuff. And I guess the themes and the way we present it is kind of retro. But actually, if you listen to it without all of that stuff, I think it's pretty much, you know, it sounds like modern metal. The production is not something that anyone would have ever been able to do in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. It's like, for me, it comes down to like trying to approach the songwriting at that kind of level, trying to go back to those times where the song was kind of everything, and albums as well. Like, we're so obsessed, like the music industry is hilariously obsessed with streaming, but actually the reason people like us, I think, is because they come to an album. You know, it's a journey. The track listing is very important. We hate putting out like singles when actually we want people to, you know, I'm so excited this week because people are going to be listening to this thing as one piece. And yeah.
But yeah, it was after like a gig a few weeks ago. I was like chatting to a guy who had obviously only heard the singles that came out, and I was just like, they're not representative of the album, like at all. And he was like, not sure if he'd like it. And the track listing in of itself, like just in general, not with you guys, it's an art unto itself of actually getting that kind of like flow with the peaks and troughs in an album to kind of lead people on that journey is like an art form within itself that maybe I again feel that not a lot of people pay as much attention to making, you know, thinking of the experience of it. They just kind of want to, you know, throw all of the
I
singles
listen to a lot of albums all the time, to the point where I get scared if someone came up to me and asked me to name 3 songs. I'd be like, I don't know, I can tell what the album's called.
Yeah, I get that as well. You know, the second to the last one on your new album, that'll be the only way I can communicate what song I'm talking about. Yeah, it's interesting. I think with This Heathen Land, we kind of wrote it deliberately. It wasn't even a case of sequencing songs. We kind of knew what function each song would have in the album, and you know, having that big opening going into the slower songs like One for Sorrow and Song of the Stones, and then having that kind of act 3 almost of the tail end of the album. It was deliberately put together from the off, and it's nice to hear that it does feel narratively coherent.
Yeah, because like even if like there isn't like a through line through it, there is an experience to that album that I found really, really fun. And I'm again conscious to not try to like overhype this album for people, but I really enjoyed it. And unlike a lot of things that kind of come into our inbox, you know, for review, I actually find myself like keep coming back to like listen to it again. And yeah, there's new things I notice every time, like whether it be the soundscaping on the album as well, which is like something that's really cool, like the different like textures of sounds that you can manage to get with both like the, you know, keyboards and guitar, or even just sort of like fun lyrical things, like the last song being about the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola Dracula film. Like that was a lot of fun and kind of like a cool little, it was a really cool like album closer as well, and the way it faded into the kind of more ambient sounds, and it was cool.
Yeah, I think that's what was such a big part of this creative process, was being allowed to, you know, we could have gone and recorded it in 2 weeks again at a really fancy studio, but we decided to go back to where we recorded Free the Witch and Woodland Rights and do it for a month. And I think that level of detail is kind of really it, like, obviously it's not the songs are the songs, but actually being able to add that level of richness and atmosphere and ambience to connect it all is super important, I think. And
Yeah,
it's
one of the most.
Yeah.
No, you go on, mate.
No, I was just going to say, like, I can't think of another track listing for this record as well. Like it couldn't really be any other way, and land like it does. I think it's so important. For instance, as you mentioned, that Oceans of Time is right at the end. Is it such a big flamboyant moment? It would be really disruptive anywhere else.
Yeah.
And Song of the Stones, you know, I think can only be this sort of midpoint where it's sort of as a palate cleanser after One for Sorrow. There's this sort of big, heavy emotional weight in the middle of the record. It's kind of fascinating because obviously when you're writing these songs, I mean, Scott may be different because he is thinking more about the album in totality at points, but I'm coming to them individually, lyrically usually, and it is interesting how essential it feels now that those things are in that order.
Yeah, strangely, my takeaways, I probably think that Song of the Stones is my favorite song on the album, and it's arguably not even a metal song. Like,
yeah,
like just having like the folk elements, like I think like no actual drums, it's just a burren that's being like, I think at least like from, and yeah, it just kind of coming in at that moment, as you said, I think it made it far more impactful than maybe if I had have just heard that in isolation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that is the problem with having to put out singles, is it robs you of the context. You know, something like Maxine is a sort of the party song of the record, and it comes in between two really heavy songs. Just put it out on its own, it feels like a sort of much more like a poppy party song, maybe, than it actually is when you listen to it.
Yeah, the detractors of like the singles that, and like the guy I was speaking to, were like, and I don't think that this is a negative thing to say, but like they were using it in a negative context of saying that you guys were sounding like Ghost with that song. And again, I don't particularly think that that's necessarily a negative.
Fair,
but
when we play you guys in the radio, we do sometimes sandwich you with a Ghost track because it just does go really well.
Yeah, I mean,
well, I like Ghost.
I like Ghost, but it's so funny. I suppose as a creator, the perspective you have on a song you've made is always going to be different from someone listening to it without the context of seeing what went into it. And Maxine's such a funny one because originally the motive was to kind of write a Queens of the Stone Age Fu Manchu kind of song. Everyone always says we're a stoner rock band, so I was like, okay, let's do a desert rock band, but do it in a Green Lung style. And if you look at it musically, if you look at the, you know, especially the drum pattern, the rhythm of it, if you look at the functional harmony and all the chord progressions, they're all very indebted to Queens of the Stone Age and that era, that kind of 2000s era of stoner rock and desert rock. And even the original, you know, the organ line on it was originally meant to be a fuzzed out guitar, but it was just sounding too Josh Homme. So I put it onto a Hammond B3 organ. And it wasn't until we went to record it that our keyboardist John was like, oh, why don't we do it on a Farfisa combo organ? As soon as we did that, Wayne, our producer, said, people are going to say it sounds like Ghost if you use a combo organ. And I said to Wayne, have some respect for the audience. People aren't just going to think it sounds like Ghost because it's got a combo organ on it, and Ghost have used a combo organ in the past. But lo and behold, that kind of became like the takeaway for a lot of people.
whatever you do, you get compared to other bands. I think it's really funny. Like people basically like to. I don't know what it is, but people like to make a comparison. You know, like it's like the first record came out, all we heard was like sounds like Sabbath. And I think on this record it's kind of funny because I think the band mutates quite a lot from song to song. Like I think Hunters in the Sky and Mount the Throne sound kind of maideny and epic. You know, Song of the Stone. Like like the idea that Ghost would write Song of the Stones is very funny to me. Like I think the Ghost thing is what happens when a band has become huge in the kind of same genre as you. Like we're also very broadly writing sort of hooky old school metal and with lots of 70s influences. And if we were playing, I don't know, like it's like any band right now doing kind of trendy Deftones-esque sort of hardcore meets shoegaze is going to be compared to Deftones. Any band that's doing old school metalcore is going to be compared to, you know, Parkway Drive or whatever. But like, you can't really stop that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's particularly
Interrupt your creative process, I guess is what I'm saying. Like,
yeah, and I think Ghost is particularly because it was a one band explosion. It wasn't a movement like with most other genres of music where there'll be a whole bunch of bands that become big in that sound, whereas it's only Ghost. It's not like Blood Ceremony are headlining arenas or Uncle Acid is out there selling millions of records. It's only Ghost. So I suppose when people hear that, they don't think, oh, that sounds like an occult rock song. That could be anything from Year of the Goat to Blood Ceremony. If they're not, I suppose if they're not that familiar with the genre, it's always going to be Ghost because Ghost is the only occult rock band that people know. But yeah, as Tom said, like you know, once Wayne said that, we were like, people are going to think this sounds like Ghost. But I think if you start second guessing what you're writing and start writing music, not only, you know, people often assume artists will write a certain song to try and sell out. But it's funny because, for example, with Maxine, even our label were like, oh, I don't know about this. I don't know if the metal people will like it. And it was kind of like pressure to not sell out almost more. Whereas we kind of wanted to do Maxine because it's a song that we really like. You know, I'm massively into punk and hardcore, and I've always wanted to write a 3.5 minute really tight Green Lung song, you know. Yeah, it's funny. I think with metal especially, there's a lot of projection as well because it's metalheads aren't people that just listen to metal, you know. It's identity and status is all wrapped up in it, and for a metal person, being seen to like the right things or not like the wrong things is just as important as just listening, you know. It's not like a pop music fan. Someone can just like Lewis Capaldi and get on with their life. You know, you don't go to an Ed Sheeran gig and wear a Lewis Capaldi t-shirt and, you know, get the piss taken out of you. But with metal, if you go to a metalhead,
if your t-shirt isn't obscure enough or something, or
exactly.
I was only told a couple of like years ago that apparently it's poor etiquette to wear the shirt of the band that you're going to see, and I was like, what? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Except the rules are even more fragmented because you're not allowed to wear the t-shirt of the band you're going to see unless it's Iron Maiden, which is a special. I don't know, man. Metal elitism is a strange one, especially the whole.
Weird.
No, go on.
I find it weird when people say ghost art metal, and I'm like, there's like Spillways as an example off the top of my head, where it sounds like kind of like glam metal-y, and it's like that's still metal. Just it's like British Steel is like the Iron Maiden album, Judas Priest album. Sorry, sound like a poser now.
Yeah. Oh, the elitists are coming for us.
They like you compare that to like I don't know Deicide. It's like metal is such a wide thing anyway, and its influences are so like vast that it doesn't make sense to pigeonhole things like that.
You've got to make it personal to you. You know, you can't listen. It's like anything in life. You know, and especially creatively, you've just got to do what feels right. And with this album, I feel like we really did push the boat out and spread our wings as a band more than we've ever done before. But it's like you were saying, like that song, Song of the Stones, that was almost the riskiest one. It's like, can we make something which doesn't have riffs and drums sound like a Green Lung song? And to me, it sounds so much like a Green Lung song.
Yeah.
And those are the biggest wins you get. Like, I still think like Maxine as a sort of hooky little dance number is a Green Lung song. And like testing the sort of like, it's crazy for us to just try and do Woodland Rights again and again. And for me, each album is all about like almost like gaining ground. Like, okay, you know, that's where we got to on the last album. I think a big song for us was Graveyard Sun on Black Harvest, because that song really landed well. It became pretty much the most popular song, I think, on that album. And it sort of showed us that as long as the lyrics and the storytelling and the sort of world felt like Green Lung, musically you could go pretty far away from that original kind of sort of Sabbathy template. And it opened a lot of doors for us, I think, on this album.
Yeah, I think like in terms of atmosphere, and obviously your voice carries a lot of that atmosphere, like the kind of like, I think it's like the register of the voice, but it's like got that kind of like very waning doom kind of quality to it. So I think like even on what's effectively a folk song like Song of the Stones, it still communicates that atmosphere.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have necessarily thought that was possible when we started the band. You know, I don't. You know, when we started the band, I hadn't really sung in bands before. I'd screamed in bands, and I think you're right. Like, what's interesting about Green Lung is that the four other members are all like multi-instrumentalists and all extremely musical, and I'm coming to it as a kind of, you know, from the garage punky, I don't know what, I can't read music, it's all very intuitive. But I think in a way, you know, when we first started the band, sometimes that would wig me out a bit. I was like, these guys are like insane musicians, how the hell am I going to keep up with them? But actually it kind of anchors it in a place, you know. I've realized like it's kind of important, as you say, that the voice is getting across the atmosphere and sort of telling the story, and then actually the music can kind of go quite far away from that center, the hard rock center of the band at points, and still feel like the same universe.
It's actually something we rubbed up against whilst recording the album. I'd been away from the studio for a day or two, and Tom and Wayne had recorded a version of Mountain Throne that had just gone full Dio, and it was too good. I said to them, like, no, part of this band is like the Templar voice, we call it, that sort of something of a goblin about him, you know, and it needs that to root it in the world we built. So we forced him to go back and do Mountain Throne worse.
Yeah, essentially, it's like the opposite of having a vocal coach. It's like having a goblin coach.
Yeah, I like the word goblin, because when I was like attempting to describe your voice before, because it does have that kind of like sinister occult quality to it. I was trying to find a complimentary way of like kind of like getting that across without just being
it's influenced by a weird mix of things. Like, I think it's definitely a dollop of Aussie. Weirdly, like Billy Corgan, I think, is one thing that no one ever mentions. When I'm doing a quiet a bit, I often listen to like Smashing Pumpkins. I think he's got a really strange sort of nasal voice that has a sort of psychedelic quality. I think that's what I'm trying to get at, is the sort of, yeah, it's like a sort of banshee outside your house, but also it has to sort of give you a bit of a mushroomsy feeling. It has to sort of be slightly off kilter. And also weirdly, Brett Anderson from Suede is someone who I think has a similar voice to me, which is completely...
Oh, yeah. I get like, those two.
I mean, like, nasally was actually going to be it was like the first adjective that came to mind, but I was like, no, that maybe possibly sounds a little insulting, so I just sort of like moved on. But there is that like quality to it.
Yeah, and I think like in rock singers, a lot of people use, you know, a more nasally tone to kind of cut through. Like even Axl Rose, I think, is a really amazing singer. He has like 4 different voices, and one of them is that very sort of quite high, straining nasal voice, and it's really interesting. Like with Woodland Rights, kind of everything was in that kind of register, and on each album I've kind of needed to sort of build other voices into that. So with this album, like with Song of the Stones, it was quite sort of, it's still in that kind of realm, but it's a bit more plaintive and straight. And on Forest Church and Oceans of Time, in the verses, I was really trying to invoke a bit of Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, that sort of goth croon, while still sort of colouring it, but like I need it. It can't just be this like, screaming goblin. It has to have some sort of like, you wanted to capture a bit more of the emotion and the sort of seductive thing. So I was going to thinking about like the sort of gothy new wave people. So it's every album, there's sort of different shades being added to it, but it's as much of a stylized vocal as like a death metal vocal or other, it is styled in a way. But I think even Dio is styled, Dio sounds like he's got that sort of barbarian, Conan the Barbarian type heft to it. And then you can hear him do what when he's a kid. And you see it completely differently.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like Ronnie and the Red Caps and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like on Oceans of Time especially, like I was getting like big kind of like goth vibes from that, which obviously with the lyrical concept sort of makes sense why you would be drawing on those musical influences to try to communicate that.
For sure,
So,
like the keyboards are very, we were thinking about Typo Negative, we were thinking about Disintegration by The Cure. We were trying to meld that into the sound world that Scott and John had created of this sort of 70s BBC documentary type hauntological thing.
I was, when writing the review, was really struggling to, because there was like the sort of crackly lo-fi recording that reminded me of like a load of weird documentaries I'd watched about paganism as a teenager, that you'd managed to kind of have that vibe throughout the album, but I was like struggling to like grasp at the words to communicate that, so I sort of just binned the idea off and just carried on with the review. But yeah, that's a really good way of describing it.
Yeah, sorry, Scott, go on.
Oh, sorry, you can carry on.
No, I was just about to say that was actually that was probably the most time-consuming part of the album, was creating that soundscape. We ended up doing it 3 or 4 times. And it was strange. The previous albums have very much been just going in and capturing the instruments, whereas this album, that was just part of the course, and we just spent as much time as possible trying to perfect that vibe. And I think it's important in terms of making all the songs feel cohesive, feeling like episodic bits of a bigger whole. And I think it was my favorite part of doing the whole album was sitting down with a bunch of old synths and trying to conjure exactly that sense of time and place.
Is a lot of the sort of spoken word stuff over the last 3 albums, is that all archival stuff, or have you had to like sort of record some of that yourselves?
Now you're asking the dangerous questions. So Woodland Rights is all archival. But on Black Harvest, we were sort of completely separate from the world. We were in this like very rural studio out in mid Wales. And we kind of made it, like the producer, Wayne, actually kind of made a decision early on, like, let's try and make the samples ourselves. So we did on that record. We went down to like the local church and I sang that beginning bit from the Harrowing, just echoey church. We like found some weird old instruments in the studio and like tried to, make the samples ourselves. And on this album, we did exactly the same. The voice at the beginning of the album is me.
Oh, right.
Just been down tuned and like worked on, but we create all the samples ourselves, because I think the weird thing is like lots of my favorite bands use samples like Cathedral or Electric Wizard. All the good samples really at this point in Doom have been taken, or at least we took the last ones on Woodland Rights.
Yeah.
And actually, in terms of the storytelling and the way we want to go, it makes more sense to kind of write those things ourselves. And I think that will continue. I think we'll probably get even more carried away with some of those elements on future albums, to be honest. It's a lot of fun.
It's quite cool because it gives almost like a found footage aspect to the kind of like the horror of the albums and stuff, which I quite like.
Yeah. It's really important, I think. I mean, a lot of my favorite bands who do that kind of thing are actually not in sort of hard rock. It's like black metal stuff. I think
Yeah.
a weird thing about Greenland that people don't really pick up on is like a lot of the themes, a lot of the presentation and stuff has kind of been done in black metal. Like there's a lot of
Mm.
it's about forests and folklore and actually like Cradle of Filth often have like spoken word passages or like that stuff is more par for the course in black metal. But I don't think our fans necessarily listen to much black metal, and it's not usually heard in this context, so it feels a bit fresher in a weird way.
I mean, like our kind of like bread and butter on this show is mainly black metal. That's kind of like the genre we seem to bond the most over, like our kind of like love of it. And we had James from Hellripper on, and he was like kind of like playfully being like how you guys are always like one step ahead of him. So like he's always had the whole goat thing as his thing, and like but you guys kind of beat him to that. The last album he did, he wanted to have a stained glass window kind of motif for the album cover. You released like Black Harvest.
No. I went to
didn't
see
know that.
Hellripper last week actually at the Black Heart in Camden.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's funny, I only know about Hellripper because I saw so many people wearing his t-shirts at our shows. I kind of assumed it was a clothing brand. It wasn't until someone was like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's this cool like one man sort of black and roll band." And yeah, I absolutely love them. I feel a
They are
weird sort
rad.
of kinship with that band, especially their most recent album, which once again it kind of feels well. This time he's beaten us to it because it was all about kind of Scottish folklore and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So this time he
Warlocks.
managed.
Every
Yeah,
time I post a picture of the map from this album, like there's no Scotland. All of the folklore is based in England and Wales on this, and people are like, "No Scotland," and I just put like go see Hellrip.
Yeah.
Got it covered. We don't want to be on that guy's turf. And actually, you telling me that has made me even more happy that we didn't do anything on Scotland, because I don't want to be stealing folklore from that guy. He's a legend.
Yeah.
James.
Yeah.
I
No.
was gonna say, because going back to what you're saying about the influences, like with like Dio and Typo Negative, we did ask you to pick like 5 songs that described your sound, and 2 of them were Dio songs.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you wanted to go through those.
Yeah, sure. So the 2 Dio songs we've picked are both. I guess on this album we were really interested in, as a point of comparison to the producer, talking about Martin Birch production.
Yeah.
And Martin Birch is probably best known for Iron Maiden, I guess. But actually,
Yeah, like there's that run of the first like 7 Maiden albums, wasn't? Oh no, he didn't do the first because they thought they couldn't afford him, even though he really wanted to work with them or something, right?
yeah. But I think if you look at what old Birchie was doing before Iron Maiden, it's this glorious run of kind of eccentric, very British hard rock albums that have a real like weight to them, and lots of color and warmth, but are really heavy and hooky. And we were like, that's kind of we had quite scrappy production on the first record. Black Harvest definitely sharpened it up. On this album, it feels much more like big classic metal sound, I think. And we wanted to do that while retaining the atmosphere from the previous records. We didn't want to like sacrifice the heaviness or the weirdness, but we wanted to just that felt like the right place. So Stargazer by Rainbow for me is pretty much the best metal song of all time. I think it has just so much in it. It's such a rich song, and for me, like in that epic sort of fantasy context, I mean, we'll never get close, but you can kind of try. And on, I think, Mountain Throne and Hunters in the Sky, definitely Rainbow was a point of reference. And then yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, that was just one of those things that I didn't, on immediately listening to it, didn't pick up on it, and now I'll never be able to not hear that because it's so, yeah, that even the riff to Mountain Throne so obviously sounds like it could have like came from sort of Blackmore or something. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and then Heaven and Hell by Sabbath is like an unbelievable achievement, really, when you consider that the previous couple of albums and Ozzy leaving, it's kind of a miracle, that record. and it's just class. It's like really mature, sort of impressive metal album. I think that deals with really big themes in a kind of grown up way, but still retains the kind of Hesher. You could still smoke a joint and wear a jean jacket. It's kind of like a Rolls Royce of metal albums to me. And so both those, it's basically, Martin Birch was for sure a kind of a way star, I guess, for this album. Just
he was almost like a sort of the Stan. Like, I've never made this comparison before, like the Stanley Kubrick of sort of like rock producers, because he would put the artist through like bizarre things, like the thing where he like made like Bruce Dickinson like recite the first two lines from Number of the Beast like 200 times or something, and just made him do take after take till he was like throwing furniture around the studio. That he apparently did that to Dio on Heaven and Hell as well.
Is that to so he could get the big scream that immediately follows those two lines?
Apparently it was
annoyed enough.
Possibly. Apparently it was more to have like the audible like frustration and franticness in the voice, like even though it's like the beginning of Heaven and Hell and the beginning of Number of the Beast are both very subdued, but it's like, yeah, he wanted them to sound like really like wound up and frantic because, but yeah, so it's like almost like the way Kubrick used to like, torture his actors. He'd do singers.
It's so funny, this stuff, because like we've never gone in for this in the studio. Like all it would do is make me go and cry in a corner, I think. Like watching like Lamb of God, like they did a documentary, I can't remember which record it's the one with Walk With Me in Hell, that record. And like Randy's clearly like a drug addict at this point, or at least a functioning alcoholic. He's turned up to the studio after not really being a part of the album process up until that point. And the producer, whose name is just Machine, I think. It's like,
I am the machine.
He's like a bald white guy. Like, he's not an actual machine, but he's like, Randy, you gotta run around the studio like 8 times, smoking a cigarette, and then come in here and sing this bit. It's just like, guys, like, pretty sure you could get the same result by just voice control, but good luck to you. I think that era of like Ross Robinson, pissing on Jonathan Davis from Korn or whatever, like it's kind of over.
Yeah.
Like we're just too chill for that stuff. We're like,
I hope we're entering a new era of Phil Spector style gun violence in the studio.
Yeah, I think in the next
love that channel.
I'm gonna get put in a wicker man and we'll like set the legs on fire and I have to deliver a vocal take before it fully engulfs me.
Or just say you did it and then let the legend spread.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. Anyway, sacrificial offerings aside, your third pick for the song?
So we've got Horn Riggs by Magnet and Paul Giovanni, but we could have kind of picked a bunch of songs from the Wicker Man soundtrack. Gently Johnny. Scott, do you want to talk about, like, Gently Johnny was kind of an influence on Song of the Stones?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of wanted to do that really bucolic sort of stripped back folk song, but when it came to actually recording it, Song of the Stones, that is, I think something that delicate didn't quite feel appropriate for the record, and especially to follow One for Sorrow. So we ended up looking a lot at Lankum, who are fantastic. Yeah. And we went far to Lankum. Tom you went away to a wedding in Ireland, I think, didn't you? And you came back and we really excitedly showed you what we had done to Song of the Stones. What was your feedback?
Well, I'd left them at it and I came back and they'd just taken out all of the guitars from the song and just put like a big synth drone. It was just that and my vocal. And I was just like, guys, no, you've gone too far. But that was the kind of the fun thing about being able to record for a month. You're allowed to go and try something mental and then come back to it. And actually, that synth line at the end of Song of the Stones kind of brings me to the next selection, which is Suspiria by Goblin. I think the synth stuff was tricky on this record. There was a lot of conversations early on in the pre-production phase, trying to nail these like as Scott says, the monosynths that are kind of like accurate to that period where they kind of correspond to something in an orchestra, or like, you know, they're being a trumpet or whatever. You can't just go anywhere. You can't use Logic. You can't use like Pro Tools and just like
you can't even they can't make more than one note at a time, so you can't even make a chord. Which completely changes how you actually arrange instruments in that context.
But also Goblin seemed to like, it was kind of how do we connect that kind of documentary BBC hauntological synth world to hard rock? And Goblin's a really good band for that, because, you know, they're a rock band, like an occult rock band, really prog band, that are making soundtracks to, you know, witchy horror movies like Suspiria, and they're using synths in this very like soundtrack mode, but they are a functioning rock band. So they were kind of a really useful way for us to connect those two worlds, which is actually, you know, it's kind of on the album now. I think it feels kind of very coherent, but actually that was a big challenge for us, getting those sounds into the rock world and not making it feel like disjointed or wrong.
Yeah, like it's like a success because it's like one of the standout kind of elements like on the album, like that whole that atmospheric sort of like through line that came through that. It's kind of, because like I'm very much like an album person, so like getting, yeah, sorry, I'm just repeating myself at this point.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear, because it felt like that to us, but you know, everyone comes to it without the context of what went into it, and that's kind of what we were aiming for. And the final one that we put forward was My Girlfriend's Girlfriend by Typo Negative. We've mentioned Typo already. I'm wearing a Typo hoodie. I don't want to sound like a sort of Typo Negative stan. But you know, I remember coming up with the band name and thinking about how Electric Wizard was 2 words from Black Sabbath song titles, and being like, oh, cool, Creepy Green Light and Lung, two Typo Negative song titles. You know, obviously not a 70s hard rock band. If anyone doesn't know Typo Negative, the goth fathers of 90s doomy music, kind of combining goth like Sisters of Mercy and The Cure with Sabbath and Danzig and that kind of sound. Yeah, it's not an influence anyone ever hears, but it's definitely there in the humor of the band, in this sort of trying to bridge hard doomy rock with gothier stuff. And actually, I think Maxine for us is like kind of our attempt at a My Girlfriend's Girlfriend type song. You know, like there aren't many Typo Negative songs that can fill a dance floor, but that one can. So yeah, that was definitely what we kind of wanted from Maxine. We kind of wanted a Green Lung song that you could actually dance to instead of, I don't know, throw up or you know, punch yourself in the face to.
I'm a big Typo fan as well, and I just thought it'd be funny to get a club full of people and put anesthesia on or something and watch them all leave.
I love them because I think they have, again, it's always Typo, but like the songs sound totally different. Like they're a different band from song to song, really. They have these really different avenues they go down, but it always feels like the same thing. And as I grow older, I feel like I gravitate towards the last 2 records. I used to be, obviously, like everyone talks about Bloody Kisses and October Rust, but I think World Coming Down is an amazing album. So cool. Really beautiful, rich songs that are kind of still funny, but still like incredibly bleak and human. It's a real pity that Peter Steele died, but I feel like their legacy just grows and grows. It's kind of one of those bands that weirdly just gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I found that as well. But my thing with Typo is I really like them. And then me and my partner always joke that like he sounds like he needs to get a room in most of his lyric line deliveries. He like
Yeah.
You can, if you listen to it with headphones and they're too loud,
It's very horny music.
yeah, it's just whispering in your ear. You're like, go away.
It's a good mix of songs that are really horny and songs just about killing yourself.
Yeah. My
And I
two
don't think
emotional states.
those two states. I think that's kind of being goth. It's just being really horny.
Yeah.
And sad. So
Yeah.
that's why it slaps.
Yeah, no, that kind of like wraps it up. Obviously, this is usually the point where we ask our guests if there's anything that they would like to plug, but I'm going to assume that's going to be This Heathen Land and out November 3rd.
Which is tomorrow, the day this airs, because we air on
Oh.
Thursdays.
Yeah, so it will be out. No, it won't be.
It's the 31st tomorrow. It's
Oh, so-
Halloween tomorrow. So it's
So it'll be the 2nd on Thursday?
yeah, the second when this airs.
No,
so
yeah,
tomorrow
sorry,
from when this airs.
I'm very
is
tired
Friday.
and just came here from work. Sorry. But yeah,
Yeah,
Um,
the other thing we've got to plug is a tour.
mm,
So we are going to be back out in the UK for 2 weeks. At the end of November, we kick off in Glasgow on the 22nd. We're kind of playing a bunch of shows up and down the UK. We've got many more shows to announce for next year, a bunch of festivals. We're going to be going to some places we have never been. Extremely excited about playing these songs for everyone live and taking the live show to stupid new heights or lows, depending on who's viewing it. Yeah, so that's kind of the thing we've been waiting for all year. So please go and check out the album, but also not many tickets left for some of those shows. I think the only ones left are like Wolverhampton, Sheffield, London at the Electric Ballroom. Maybe everything else is sold out at this point.
We need to
Okay,
get our
has it?
tickets,
Wolverhampton's not that far away, so we could possibly do that one.
tickets for Manchester.
Hmm?
We need to see if there's tickets for Manchester. It's in the Gorilla.
I think there is possibly still tickets for Manchester. I'm not sure.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll look into that like for sure because I want to see you guys again, 100%. But thank you so much for joining us for our Halloween special. Couldn't have thought of a better, spookier band to have on.
Oh, absolute pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure, guys. Thanks so much.